Jerusalem the Golden, a city of ancient yearnings. It stands for the triumph of man's spirit and tugs at his soul. Once a city divided, it is again united. The city of David is the capital of modern Israel. For 2,000 years, the prayer of Jews in exile was a fervent hope. Next year, in Jerusalem. And in the city of gold, that prayer has been answered. To come to Israel is to be drawn irresistibly to Jerusalem. Through the Damascus Gate, you walk into history. One of the two main entrances to the ancient walled section of the city, the Damascus Gate has stood closed for 20 years. Then came the Six-Day War in 1967. And now the ancient doors are perpetually open as an invitation to all men. Any guidebook will tell you the fantastic history of Jerusalem. It was here when Abraham came to the promised land. King David made it his capital. Solomon and Herod built temples here. Christ was crucified. The Christians, Arabs, Turks, and a host of others have ruled this city. But Jerusalem is not a fossil. It lives and breathes today. And you will understand the city when you learn to read not only its history, its walls and stones and hills, also the faces of its people. There is a special time to see Jerusalem, the Sabbath Eve. In the murmuring stillness of the oncoming day of rest stroll Orthodox Jews, dressed much as their great-great-grandfathers in Eastern Europe. They come to the Western Wall, the holiest of Jewish sites. It's also the Wailing Wall, because this is where Jews have come to bewail the loss of their temple. These large blocks are part of the last remnants of the ancient Temple Mount, about 40 feet high and 60 yards long, with grass growing from its cracks and its crevices stuffed with the prayers of the faithful. The sacred site has become the focus of a new and powerful yearning that has swept Israel and the Jewish world. Beginning with the fervor, dedication and sacrifice of the Six-Day War, the wall has come to stand for everything the Jews had once lost, and now have regained. Groups of Hasidim, pious Orthodox Jews, are on duty each morning to encourage Jewish men to wear the tefillin, the phylacteries. Each morning, except for the Sabbath, the Orthodox Jew wraps the leather straps around arm and forehead. One set of straps is wound 7 times around the left arm with a prayer box close to the heart. The second is worn on the head. Thus, symbolically, the Jew binds his strength, his heart, and his mind together in the service of God.
بشرك وبرفق خبرك وبشرك خبرك وكتبت أمام سجاك تشكر بشرك وما يعمل كوزي أو هذا من إيش
If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. The young and the old, believer and non-believer, at the wall, all are one. The wall has become an open-air synagogue, and as such there is a separate section for men and one for women. Orthodox custom forbids mixed prayer. The bar mitzvah, the ceremony which confirms a 13-year-old boy as a responsible adult member of the Jewish people. On this occasion, the ceremony is in the style and tradition of Oriental Jewish communities. A feature of the bar mitzvah ceremony is the reading of the Torah, the scrolls of the 5 biblical books of Moses, encased in wood and written on parchment. To end the ceremony, a bar mitzvah prayer at the wall. Jerusalem lives in the golden sun of its present and reflects on the glory and tragedy of its past. It's a city eager to weld its history with its future. And so it's a city of workers, digging, excavating, clearing, building. This team of archaeologists is digging at the southern wall of the temple area. So far, 13 different levels of habitation have been uncovered. Fragments of clay vessels bearing Hebrew inscriptions have been found. But the full story of Solomon and Herod, of the priests and the Levites, a story which lies buried under these stones, is still waiting to be told. There is enough work on this site alone to keep a whole generation of archaeologists busy while they sieve through the rubbish and dust of centuries. The temple walls, like many of the important religious sites, are in the Old City. Formerly in the Jordanian-held sector, the Old City today is part of East Jerusalem. No other city, even in the Middle East, is quite like it. It tumbles through narrow lanes and cobbled alleys, meanders across vaulted market streets and around open bazaars. It's a warren of noisy shops, a smell of spices, flies and donkeys and people. The old city has brought an extra 70,000 people into the Israeli municipality of Jerusalem, which now administers a total of 260,000. Jew and Arab mingle freely, but for both Jews and Arabs, there have been problems of adjustment. To the Jews, the Arabs are not only another people of another culture and another faith. They're people who for 20 years were surrounded by an atmosphere of distrust and hate for the state of Israel. These streets echoed to the vicious propaganda of Radio Cairo and Radio Amman. After the Six-Day War and the Israeli victory, some of this distrust and hate remains. But the remarkable story of reunited Jerusalem has been its successes, not its failures. The visitor and the resident can now stroll easily from the old city to West Jerusalem. After nearly 2 years, it's still something to come out of the old city, to sense the contrast. The streets look different, so does the traffic, so do the people. But there is as much variation here. Jews from 80 countries make up the population, from Viennese pastry cooks to Turkish stamp dealers. All are becoming Israelis. Jerusalem is a city for strolling around, not driving around. Somewhat overshadowed as a tourist attraction by the pull of the old city, there's still plenty to see in West Jerusalem. If you get lost, look for the YMCA building, the outstanding landmark of the city. It's probably the only YMCA centre where most of the members are Jewish. It's also a focal point for the coming together of Jew, Christian and Arab, especially so for the youngsters in sport. Jewish and Arab children are meeting at summer camps like these. Today's guest is Jerusalem's Mayor Teddy Kollek. It's Kollek's administration which has organised the mixed camps. And it's the bustling Kollek who is determined to overcome the obstacles on the way to a truly integrated city. Who would have this man's job? Perhaps New York's Mayor Lindsay and Mayor Kollek should compare notes one day. It was hard enough when Mayor Kollek only had Jewish Jerusalem to worry about. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You've heard the joke. Ask Teddy Kollek. It's no joke. A reunited Jerusalem has been an even bigger challenge for Mayor Kollek.
If you look at cities like Montreal, for instance, with which we in a sense try to compare ourselves because there are English and French, and the English will remain English and the French French, as the Arabs will remain Arabs and the Israelis, Jews here in this city. Still, the tension there hasn't entirely disappeared after 150 years and under less difficult circumstances. So aren't you asking for too much after a year? The fact is that in difference to many large cities, from Belgrade to Berlin and from Paris to Washington and from Chicago to Los Angeles or so, this has been a quiet city for the last year.
ornate and serene, a golden-domed Islamic shrine. The Dome of the Rock stands on the site of the Jewish temple. It was built in 688 by Caliph Abdul Malik. On this same site, tradition has it that Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and Islam believes that this is where Muhammad ascended to heaven on his horse Buraq. After Mecca and Medina, this is the most sacred place for Muslims. They call it Haram Esh-Sharif. The tragic irony of the gulf between the Arab and Jew lies in the historic link which both peoples share in their reverence for Jerusalem. The Israeli administration has taken care not to encroach on the Muslim title to the Temple Mount. Muslims account for 80% of East Jerusalem's population. They first came here in the 7th century. For 500 years, the Muslims ruled here. Then, intermittently, other kingdoms took over, until 1517, when the Ottoman Turks conquered Jerusalem, and again Muslims ruled. This time for exactly 400 years until 1970. In that year, General Allenby led his British regiment through the Jaffa Gate. Since then, the British, the Jordanians, and now the Israelis, the first indigenous people to administer Jerusalem for centuries. The third world religion, which cherishes a special interest in Jerusalem, is Christianity. There are scores of Christian centers in Jerusalem, and it's the headquarters for many high-ranking church dignitaries. They include the 3 patriarchs, the Greek Orthodox, the Latin, and the Armenian Orthodox. On Palm Sunday, an Armenian Orthodox procession winds its way through the old city. During Easter week, pilgrims crowd the streets to take part in centuries-old rituals like the Greek Orthodox pageant, the washing of the feet, a ceremony symbolizing humility and obedience. A feature of the Easter ceremonies is the retracing of Christ's last steps on the way to the crucifixion. This is the way of the cross, the Via Dolorosa. Millions of pilgrims have taken this path, stopping to pray at each of the 14 stations of the cross. The stations retrace the route followed by Christ from the Roman Praetorium, the Judgment Hall, to Calvary. The last 5 stations of the cross are inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at Golgotha, Christendom's most sacred shrine. Once more, Jerusalem displays her irony. This is where Christians believe Christ was buried and resurrected. But this is where Christians find themselves most divided. 6 Christian communities share rights to care for this crumbling church. Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Armenian Orthodox as major holders. Copts, Ethiopians and Syrians as minor holders. None of these holds keys to the church. They're vested with a Muslim family to prevent bickering. Lines drawn down the middle of floors and pillars divide the areas. Every few feet, the church styles and decor changes. Worship varies, traditions vary. Only faith, it would seem, is shared. A few miles from Jerusalem, the birthplace of Christ at Bethlehem. At the end of a narrow staircase, the traditional grotto of the birth in the Church of the Nativity. The Emperor Constantine built it for his mother. Here, as in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the care and preservation of the church is shared between denominations, the Armenian, Greek and Franciscan priests. Apart from its shrines, history and tourists, what sort of place is Jerusalem to live in? The Jerusalem Post.
This is a very strange place. This is a dead-end city until the Six-Day War. At about 7 o'clock in the evening, the town used to pack up, roll up the pavements, fold up the buildings and go to sleep. You know, nothing moved for the whole night. And then suddenly, after the war, the place sort of became the center of the world. Everything seemed to be happening here. The whole world's eyes were sort of focused on this city. And there was a kind of, it was a real experience to live here. You could feel the place throbbing. And it's not a dead-end place anymore. It's like it's the center of Israel now, where Tel Aviv was the center before. And this is where all the tourists come, and everything seems to be happening here.
Is there any hate?
There's no hate at all. There's a bit of political hostility, very little. I mean, the Arabs feel it towards us very slightly, and we feel it towards them. It's a political hostility. But we meet with them every day. They're people like we are. And we're surprised how easy it is to live with them. We didn't know this before, and they seem to be surprised how easy it is to be friends with us as well.
Jerusalem cannot boast a swinging nightlife, but what it does have is distinctive. For Israelis, many of whom can remember the old city before it was cut off 20 years ago, the chance to sit again in an Arab restaurant, to try out their Arabic, to meet with Arab friends, to sample Arabic food, all this has been welcome. At one such restaurant, Israeli David Neumann speaks of what Jerusalem today means to him.
Living in Jerusalem means for me personally as a Jew, living in the eternal capital of the Holy Land. Jerusalem is the capital of this land. Whether this land is a bit bigger or a bit smaller, it's always Israel, and Israel is the land, the home of all Jews in the world. We hope one day all of them will come here. And living here means to me also living in a city which is a city of culture, a city of science, and a city with a fantastic landscape.
And to look out across that landscape from the Mount of Olives is to begin to understand an old Jewish saying. 10 parts of beauty were allotted the world, and of these Jerusalem assumed 9 measures, and the rest of the world but 1. 10 parts of suffering were visited upon the world, 1 for the world, and 9 for Jerusalem. After the Wailing Wall in the Old City, the next most important Jewish shrine is on Mount Zion in West Jerusalem. This is the traditional burial place of King David, who ruled over Israel and sang unto the Lord. In a room cut out of rock, the smoke from flickering candles stains the walls and casts shadows over the stone tomb. David chose Jerusalem as his capital because it did not belong to any one of the 12 tribes. And in the 3,000 years which followed, Jews have looked to it as David's city. Mount Zion houses a cluster of buildings. The whole area once bordered no man's land, and Arab legionnaires used to be a favorite subject for tourist photographers. Today, Mount Zion is in the center of Jerusalem. Away from the center of Jerusalem, a modern shrine built to revere the memory of another leader, President John F. Kennedy. Opened in 1966, the concrete memorial is encircled by 51 columns carrying the emblems of the 51 American states. The 60-foot-high monument is designed in the shape of half a tree trunk, evoking the president whose life was cut short in its prime. This is what the largest completely Jewish city in the world looks like. A sprawling modern city laid out in cubes of concrete. The grey-white apartment blocks of Tel Aviv run down to the beach. Skyscrapers are beginning to jut out from the uniform squares. And before your plane has even landed at Lydda Airport, you've heard some of the adjectives everybody uses to describe Tel Aviv. Young, vital, claustrophobic, rude. And did someone say swinging? Well, not exactly. Tel Aviv would like to be swinging and tries very hard to be in the big league of London, Paris, Rome, New York. But its 600,000 people make it a small city by international standards. It's a provincial place trying to be a metropolis. But that's what gives Tel Aviv its special appeal. It's fashionable to dislike Tel Aviv because it lacks the grace and history of Jerusalem or the natural beauty of Haifa. Tel Aviv, you will probably be told, does not have a soul. Maybe. But the thrust of the city is its own charm. The citizens of Tel Aviv know that while their city is not the national capital, it's nevertheless the commercial, cultural, and entertainment center of Israel. Tel Aviv is a beach city. The Mediterranean laps against the sands on which the city rests. In the summer, which lasts for most of the year, Tel Aviv Beach is the most crowded piece of real estate in all Israel. Getting around to see Israel can be done by train, drive yourself car, plane, or tourist coach. But for variety and interest, nothing can beat grabbing your suitcase and heading for Israel's central bus terminal in Tel Aviv. This is where you'll meet some of Israel's elite, the bus drivers. The drivers are members of a cooperative, and their earnings put many of them in the top income bracket, ahead of cabinet ministers. On an Israeli bus, you may find yourself sitting next to a woman with a cackling chicken in her bag, a theological student who recites the Psalms, or a young soldier nursing his submachine gun. Haifa. Israelis like to say that Jerusalem is for learning, Tel Aviv is for fun, and Haifa is for work. From the Golden Dome Temple of the Baha'i Faith, which dominates the city's skyline, to the attractive houses on Mount Carmel, Haifa is a city of panoramas. It's the city you see first if you come to Israel by ship, and there can be few more moving sights than Haifa in the morning sun. Once Israel's second city after Tel Aviv, Haifa has had to take third place behind reunited Jerusalem. Like Tel Aviv, it is a city which hardly existed at the turn of the century. In 1898, the founder of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, sailed across Haifa Bay and had a vision. At the top of the mountain there were thousands of white homes, and the mountain itself was crowned with imposing villas. A beautiful city had been built close to the deep blue sea. Haifa is no dream but a reality. From its port handling millions of tons of cargo to its prestigious Institute of Technology, Haifa has fulfilled the prophecies. Thursday in Beersheba, market day for the Bedouin tribes of the desert. From the early dawn, the camel trains have been coming in to buy and sell in the market.
لا بده الباكي طيب الباكي 10 انت مش اخذت واحد طيب خذوا ليره ولا 13 ليرات ولا واحد شوف هذا الشغل اليوم قاعد ايوه بعدين.
The earliest Hebrews came to this place for water, rest and trade. They must have looked much as these Bedouin do today. Abraham dug a well here and planted a tamarisk grove. Isaac's son, Jacob, dwelt at Beersheba, and for centuries it was an important biblical center along the overland caravan routes. Today the marketplace is at the end of the main street in a modern city of 60,000 people. The capital of the Negev is yet another city to rise from the sands. But here on the fringe of Israel's desert, the 20th century is far behind. The Bedouin come as they have always come, to sell their camels and goats, to buy cloth, flour and coffee, to exchange rugs, to haggle for trinkets, to gossip and to rest. The market sells to everyone, not only the Bedouin, and if you haggle, there are bargains, in copper and brass, in wood carvings, Arabian saddlecloths and rugs. Wrapped in black and veiled according to custom, the women of the desert sell their jewels and trinkets from improvised displays.
الحين قلت يسلم حط الخرج غاد زي عيد وحطته في الجلد. عندك الخرج؟ هذا فوق الجلد وفوق السوق. العفو منك ما أعطيك حاجة.
قديش عمره؟
ليش تيجي لا بطلع انا اللي طلع من ايدي اعطيني اياه مش خدمة اخو لاخوه طيب انا بطلع خدمة اخو لاخوه ولا لا؟ ها بطلع ب 100 ريال مش خذ مني اما اخو مش خدم اخوه
By noon, most of the buying and selling has ended. Having watered their camels, the Bedouin returned to the black goatskin tents in the desert. Travelling east from Beersheba, the road moves on to the Dead Sea, framed by the forbidding mountains of Moab and Edom. Barren and ominous, they stand guard over the lowest point on earth, the edge of the Dead Sea at 1,300 feet below sea level. Israel is taking many tons of valuable chemicals from these waters, but for the visitor, it's an opportunity for an unforgettable experience, a swim in the Dead Sea. And it is true, you can't sink. You don't always have the chance to go swimming in water that is 25% solid, so you'll need that shower afterwards. These children were born in a kibbutz made famous by former Premier David Ben-Gurion, who retired from politics to come and live in his beloved Negev. In his 80s, Ben-Gurion retains his vision and his humor. We asked him, as an old soldier himself, why the Israeli soldier was so good.
When I was a soldier, I was young, not old. What makes them good is their officers. Their officers learned that in an army it's not enough to have a good discipline. The soldier must have trust in his commander. And to gain the trust of his soldiers, the commander must be an example for his soldiers in the war. He must go first, that they should follow him.
Can you tell us what the reason is that the best fighter pilots come from kibbutzim and the best army officers? Why from kibbutzim?
Because not only kibbutzim, from kibbutzim and moshavim.
Yes.
Because our best people are there. Symbolism. The best people are going to kibbutz and to moshav. So far, I don't know what is going to happen in the future.
Can you tell us, Mr. Ben-Gurion, what were your very first thoughts when you reached the Wailing War in the Six-Day War?
Well, I have been there many times. The first year when I came to this country. But the first thing was, now, again, Jerusalem, in the entire Jerusalem, is like in the times of David, King David, is the capital of Israel.
Can you tell us, what is your advice to young people today?
My advice to young people here, that they should serve as an example to other young people of other nations in their devotions to peace, and to progress, and to humanity.
What is your own personal formula for peace?
Formula for peace, that we should feel that we belong to one human race. You mean peace with our neighbors?
Yes.
Well, I doubt whether they will accept my advice.
What is your forecast for the desert here? What is going to happen here?
The desert here must not remain a desert just as this place. Where you are sitting, 5 years ago, there was not a single grass, not a single tree. My friends, they bought old trees and planted them here. This can be done throughout the Negev. And it should be done.
How many years do you think it will take before the Negev is one big garden?
Well, this is impossible to say beforehand. And this depends on many people who come to Israel from well-to-do countries, from Northern America, Southern America, south of Africa, Western Europe. The more they come, the sooner it will be no more a desert.
Mr. Ben-Gurion, you have consistently attacked Zionism because most Zionists do not come here and settle. Do you believe that Zionism is dead?
No, I did not attack Zionists at all. I merely said I am not a Zionist. I am just a Jew who feels that his life of a Jew and of a human being can be only in this country.
Who do you think will be the next Prime Minister? Who would you like to see?
Oh, I'm not a prophet. And a prophet also, there's a mistaken notion about prophets. Prophets didn't know what is going to happen. They only knew if you behave the right way, then it will be all right. You go the wrong way, you will have to suffer. But they didn't know what you're going to do. So I cannot say who is going to be
who would you like to
next
see as
Prime
next
Minister. Well, I think it's better that I shouldn't say it.
What do you think is the most important thing you've done for Israel amongst all the important things you've done for Israel?
I didn't do any important thing. I just have done my duty, that's all. It's like many others. All my friends, they have done the same duty.
How long are you going to be active in politics?
I'm not active in politics now. I gave it up 4 years ago. I thought it's enough. I was 15 years Prime Minister, and that's enough.
Will Israel always control Jerusalem?
I hope so. Well, it was 3,000 years ago, our capital, and why not? Forever.
Ben-Gurion and other Israeli leaders know that the kibbutz settlements are important not only in reclaiming the desert, but as vital strategic posts in the chain of Israeli border defenses. These are the Golan Heights in Israeli-occupied territory. They overlook the settlements which for 20 years were the regular targets for Syrian artillery. From the heights, the settlements were easy targets, but they were not so easily destroyed. Despite the daily danger and the casualties, they all stood firm. Not one was abandoned. Pioneering and defense. These are the national tasks the communal settlements have had to accept. But they're also part of an agricultural movement, and above all, a social experiment in brotherhood. Only some 4% of Israelis live on settlements, but they have an influence out of all proportion to their numbers. But the times are changing. After 50 years, the question is, will this unique experiment survive? The kibbutz members themselves are confident.
Right, as far as the future of the kibbutzim is concerned, I do think they will last for a long time. I say this because the kibbutz movement is a large movement, extremely well organized, and its results in terms of making a profit, of bringing the land under production, of producing the food, are good results, and have given the kibbutzim a very strong basis. I'm very pleased to feel the kibbutzim will survive for two main reasons. One is I wouldn't like to see all the agricultural side of Israel diminishing from the map. And the fact that here we have a peasantry who've got a high educational and cultural standard, in my opinion, is a tremendous asset. And I think this will carry on. The second reason why I feel and am pleased the kibbutzim will survive is I think they've proved something which was always said to be doubtful, and that is, can people live together reasonably well, reasonably in harmony, and make a living together? I've got no doubt the kibbutzim will change tremendously, will become more liberal, will go in for more and more scientific adventures. But the basic living together, I think, is here for a long, long time.
The kibbutz is based on ideals, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Such a way of life means a special kind of education. So the children are taken from their parents after a few months and cared for in a communal nursery. They go to a communal school and mostly live in communal dormitories. But they do see their parents every day. Despite the cheerfulness of kibbutz children, many visitors think the separation of families cruel and harmful. Kibbutz mothers disagree.
The question has been asked if the children aren't torn away from the parents and suffer because of that. That isn't true. From the time a child is born, it's true it goes to the children's house, but the mother takes care of it. For 6 weeks she doesn't work at all, and then she starts working 4 hours a day, 5 and 6. By the time the child is 6 months old, the mother works a full day, and she can come when she's not busy to take care of the child. She takes it home at about 3, and then as the children grow older, they come home by themselves. The parents see them approximately from 4 o'clock till about 8 or 9. As they grow up, they see them even more. I think that the children here, the parents see their children far more than they would in Tel Aviv, where the mother may be busy in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and the father is at work and comes home late. Our children, however, do not show any signs of suffering of any neglect, and we have a very strong family life.
Kibbutz children are considered the typical Sabras, or native-born Israelis. Sabras are prickly pears. And like that fruit, the native-born Israeli is thought to be tough and prickly on the outside, sweet and pleasant on the inside. Whether the Sabra stereotype has any truth or not, it's clear that the young Israelis are today a new breed compared with the Jews of Eastern Europe, who were their fathers and grandfathers. And they're a different breed from most young Jews in the West today. It's hard to categorize them. They're optimistic, aggressive, self-confident. They're a can-do generation. They've had to be to survive. But this new generation of Sabras has yet to show what kind of Israel it wants to inherit from the older generation. One thing is clear. It's less tied to slogans and ideologies. Like youth elsewhere, it's in search of the good life.
ילדים כבר אמרו, להם לילה טוב, בחוצות הכלבים חורצים לשון, כבר הגיע הזמן ללכת לישון. בפינה חשוכה, בקרן הרחוב, זוג נפרד בנשיקה, לוחש לילה טוב, התריסים כבר הוגפו, ושקט בעיר, הגנים מתרוקנים.
The haunting ruins of Caesarea, washed by the seas of history. Once a splendid harbour town, it was here that the Jews raised the flag of revolt against the Romans.
כבד על הטוב, מנגן ביבבה, שלום לילה טוב, השומר הזקן, פנסו מכין, מכוון אוצרות על מנעול ובריחים. וחוזרים הגלים, גם אנחנו נאמר לכם לילה טוב, נצטט שרידי היום שעבר, נקווה טוב יותר יהיה המחר.
In no other country do people take archaeology as seriously as they do in Israel. Israel's most famous archaeologist is Professor Yigal Yadin, who's been working on the site of the biblical city of Hatzor.
Well, what we are looking at actually at this moment are the remains of a citadel of Ahab, the Israelite king of the 9th century. He built a citadel here on top of Solomon's citadel, and we are actually standing below the floor of the citadel about 11th century BC. So in fact we are surrounded by about 300 years of history here on this very spot where we stand. The wall on the left is the wall of Ahab citadel of about 860 BC, while we stand here on the floor of a high place of time of David about 1000 BC. So we have here about 150 years between the walls around us and the floor on which we stand, because they are very different strata. Now this is the biggest site in Palestine, and in fact one of the biggest in the Near East. I was attracted to this site because it is mentioned several times in the Bible. Firstly, in connection with Joshua, who is, according to the Bible, destroyed that city and burned it. And then we are told that Solomon rebuilt it. And in fact, in these 4 years of digging, we found here 22 cities, one on top of the other. The oldest one goes back to about 2700 BC, while the latest one, the top one, is about the 2nd or 3rd centuries BC. We did find, in fact, the last Canaanite city, which is our city 13 from the top, which I believe is the city which was destroyed by Joshua. We found the city which Solomon rebuilt, which is our city number 10 from the top. And from that point of view, of course, it was very important because we were in a position to date every stratum really accurately with the help of the Bible and the help of some other external material. I would say, literally speaking, we could have held the Bible in one hand and the spade in the other.
The site which made Professor Yadin a household word in Israel was Masada, the ancient Jewish fortress. Working with a team of volunteers, Professor Yadin revealed the story of courage, which is Masada. The Masada excavation was the biggest archaeological enterprise ever undertaken in Israel. It was not just a matter of historical curiosity which attracted so much interest. It was the story of heroism and sacrifice behind Masada's last stand, which drew the volunteers and now draws the visitors. The climb to Masada has become a national tradition. On this great rock in the year 70 flared the last revolt of an independent Jewish nation before its destruction and dispersal by the Romans. These are the remains of King Herod's palace. Some 75 years after Herod's death, the last band of Jewish rebels fled to this fortress after the Romans had conquered Jerusalem. For 3 years they held out until the Romans finally attacked the walls with torch throwers. The revolt was over, but there was to be no surrender. The leader of the rebels persuaded the 960 men, women and children with him that a death of glory was preferable to a life of infamy. And so after the choosing of lots to see who would wield the sword, there was a solemn mass suicide. The Romans entered the fortress to find only the silent dead. There is a saying in Israel today, Masada will not fall for a second time. The Yad Vashem Memorial dedicated to the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis. A jolting reminder that thriving modern Israel arose out of the ashes of a Holocaust. On the road to Jerusalem, the rusted armoured cars have been left as a new kind of memorial to the men and women who fought and sacrificed to keep open the road to Jerusalem during the War of Independence. Israel celebrates its rebirth and its victory. The display of Israel's military strength through the streets of Jerusalem is not merely a show of self-confidence and national pride. It is a way of telling the world that the Jew is tired of being the victim. Israel wants peace, but not the peace of the dead. After centuries of persecution, pillage and plunder, after a genocidal attack which wiped out a third of the world's Jews, after homelessness and prejudice, Israel is definite. There will be no more final solutions. The word most used to describe Israel's survival for 20 years is miracle. After 3 wars, the ingathering of the exiles and the development of a desert, Israel still has her greatest challenges ahead. Not only to survive, but to create a special kind of nation. Some say it will take another miracle for Israel to get there. The Israelis have other ideas. After all, they've made the miraculous happen.